So with that, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker. Kai Merkley is a fourth-year PhD student in classical philology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Their research interests include the performance of gender in antiquity, transgender literary theory, and adaptation and reception theory, with a particular interest in how science fiction interacts with classical literature. Their dissertation aims to highlight gender nonconforming and diverse gender identities in imperial Roman literature by providing a framework to separate instances of cross-gender behavior that are hegemonic from behavior that reveals alternate conceptions of personal identity. Their talk today is titled Monstrous Masculinity, Toxic Masculinity Encounters the Minotaur in Legends of Tomorrow.
Thank you. All right, and you can all see that? Cool. So DC's Legends of Tomorrow has long been concerned with interrogating conceptions of gender and overturning established narratives in order to reveal a utopian set of new ideals, an idealistic endeavor for a corny time-traveling space comedy that's made up of cast-offs from the larger DC Comics Arrowverse. Season 4, Episode 4, Tender is the Nate, turns to critiquing performances of masculine values and leverages the trope of the hero versus the monstrous other, represented in this episode by the temporal interpolation of the Minotaur myth into 1920s Paris, to critique masculinity and analyze what might make it toxic. This episode is framed around a father and son pair. Nate is a long-term member of the Legends, our superheroes, a superhero who can turn his body to steel, and the team's resident historian. Hank, Nate's father, is the de facto leader of the Time Bureau as the Department of Defense liaison. He holds the purse strings and all the power. Before this episode, it has been well established that Hank has always been disappointed in Nate and wishes that his son had more closely followed his footsteps and emulated his masculinity, a masculinity which closely conforms to normative ideals, marked by a control of emotion, an aversion to homosexuality, a desire for power and dominance, an aggressive use of force to solve problems, and a desire to be a winner. As the desire for power and dominance, that aversion to homosexuality, along with the general aversion to other alternative or subordinate masculinities, and the aggressive use of force have been found particularly harmful to the men who embody these traits, per Kaya et al.'s study. In this presentation, I define masculinities which rely on a nexus of these three traits. I define that as toxic, and Hank's masculinity fulfills all of these. The conflict between Hank and Nate is obvious at the start.
I increase their budget so they can build magical containment cells to start capturing these creatures. Meanwhile, they're running a 9-figure deficit on a time ship.
Okay, take a deep breath, Hank. If you knew what the Legends did, you realize they're worth every single penny. Now, how about this? I'll set up a ride-along. You can meet the gang and see where I used to live.
I can see where my money's going.
Sure.
You're right. Why don't we go now?
Now, we should probably give them a chance, to clean up.
We can't warn them we're coming. That would defeat the purpose.
Okay, I gotta hail the wave rider, and that's gonna take forever.
Nathaniel, as your boss, I demand you take me to the wave rider.
Gonna play the boss card again. Okay, Dad. Sorry. Captain Haywood. Let's go see what the Legends are up to.
When Hank springs a surprise inspection on the team, he sees an opportunity to assert his version of masculinity and take charge of the mission. In 1920s Paris, Hank finds the perfect ally in Ernest Hemingway, a dominant, powerful, aggressive winner, the very embodiment of his masculine ideals. When the team learns that a monstrous creature hides in the catacombs of Paris, Hemingway and Hank resort to force as the only solution necessary to resolve the problem, leading to a disastrous encounter with the Minotaur. In the end, the conflict with the Minotaur can only be resolved after Hank proves willing to reformulate his masculinity, abandoning his reliance on power and aggression. In this episode, the Minotaur is used as a foil for toxic masculinity. At first glance, the Minotaur is a terrifying monster who needs to be subdued, while Hemingway represents the ideal hero. However, the expected narrative arc of the story, hero conquers monster, is subverted when violence fails to resolve the conflict. As we, the audience, obtain more information, our conception of the Minotaur begins to shift from a monster to be conquered to an othered individual, rejected and misunderstood by society. The Minotaur is not who or what we assume at first glance.
Oh, that's a Minotaur.
A beast, half man, half bull, spent its whole life lost in a maze.
Oh, now that's the common myth. I heard a different story. The Minotaur, he's not lost. He's hiding. Rejected by his father, he felt that he had no place in the real world, and so he chose to stay in the maze.
We later learn that the Minotaur's mother used to serenade him to sleep on a lute built by Daedalus. Such small details force us to rehumanize the monstrous other and confront the fact that our expectations do not match the nuanced realities of the situation. This use of classical mythology as a tool to introduce an outdated or morally dubious cultural narrative is not new to Legends of Tomorrow or to the Arrowverse as a whole. In fact, the Arrowverse regularly uses classical mythology to introduce the faults and outworn ideologies of our modern society. In a previous iteration of this very conference, I've presented on how Legends of Tomorrow portrays Helen of Troy, trapped in the narrative arc of mythology. Mythology leaves her no choice until a group of women intervene, break this narrative, and empower her with new options. In this episode, Legends of Tomorrow continues to use classical myths to critique and question expected or normative cultural narratives. These expectations establish a place for the Minotaur, just as they establish a heroic narrative for Hemingway and Hank. Yet the expectations set by the classical narrative and the heroic masculinity it represents are doomed to failure. For a moment, let's turn to examine the different masculinities present in this episode. Hemingway is presented in the episode as the ideal man, particularly in the eyes of Hank.
Oh my God, it's him. Papa.
Papa, what? Your grandfather's here?
Thought he blew up in space.
You were so insensitive. Not that, Papa. Ernest Hemingway. He's like my dad's spirit animal.
I say, if we want to get things done, we ask the original man of action.
Your dad is totally geeking out right now.
Mm-hmm. My entire life, my father would go on and on about Hemingway and how that was his idea of a real man.
Hemingway is a real man. A man of action, where action is most often a byword for dominance and aggression. He picks fights and instantly judges other men and their value based on their appearance.
The bull is not the enemy of the bullfighter. He is his partner. They are dancers, locked in a dance of death. Whichever dies, man or bull, the dance is a thing of beauty.
Hey, we gotta go. I got a lead on that thing we're hunting.
You are hunters.
Stay out of this, Hemingway.
Perhaps you'd like to settle out differences like men.
Oh, I don't have time for this macho crap, man.
Okay, you two with me. Rory, keep him busy.
Fine specimen of male vitality. Fellow pugilist, no doubt.
Author.
Ah, my kind of man. Join me.
As Hemingway prepares to confront the Minotaur in the labyrinth, he derides Sarah's ability to help in this masculine endeavor. When confronted with doubts about the wisdom of his plan, he confidently declares, "I found that in life, the shortest answer is just doing the thing," a battle cry which Hank attempts to imitate. Hemingway's call to masculine action shapes the masculinity of those around him, drawing Hank and Mick into similar masculine performances.
Whoa, where are you all going?
Henry here told me of a creature hiding in the catacombs.
Oh, did you, Henry?
Therefore, we hunt.
Let's go get our monster.
Nate's right. We have no idea what this thing is.
A man hunts not to learn about his prey, but to learn about himself.
We need to regroup with the team and get some backup.
What better backup than Hemingway? I'm finally starting to understand what it is the legends do.
Marcel, fetch me my rifles.
Right away, sir.
I need a Marcel.
Yeah, just a little drunk hunting with Hemingway. What could go wrong?
Hemingway enacts a masculinity that other men recognize as hegemonic. Hank's already admitted that he views Hemingway as the ideal man, and in their subsequent actions, both he and Mick conform instantly to the expectations and performance of Hemingway's masculinity. Here, I follow Connell's conception of hegemonic masculinity, a system of establishing and reinforcing the dominance of a given performance of masculinity within a society. To be hegemonic, a masculinity must subordinate and devalue masculinities that substantially differ from itself. Hemingway's assertion of hegemonic masculinity leads to multiple disasters. First, with a defeat in the catacombs, and I'll show you just the very beginning of this clip here to show his Hemingway's bravado.
There it is, awaiting the fight. I got this, mine's longer.
So that confident declaration, I got this, mine's longer. Hemingway easily serves, and later, Hemingway's misapplication of violence once again foils the legend's plan to peacefully relocate the Minotaur, and Hemingway easily serves as this representative of hegemonic masculinity, because in our modern discourse, he has come to represent a potent symbol for what real men should act like. To provide one example of this, a quick search of the website, The Art of Manliness, a website dedicated to propagating and teaching certain masculine skills, and which generally idolizes the masculinity of the 1940s and 50s, reveals a plethora of articles that mention Hemingway and his work, ranging from how to make a hamburger like Hemingway, to advice on camping out, to larger questions about life and how life should best be lived. Turning to Hank now. As a civilian and a bureaucrat who works for the Department of Defense, Hank lives a life that is a far cry from the excitement of Hemingway's. However, he attempts to embody a similar masculinity to his hero. He emulates Hemingway's aggression and desire for power and fully endorses all of his plans. Even after being injured, and you can see the injury on his shoulder there, in Hemingway's mismanaged attack on the Minotaur, he mimics Hemingway's behavior, discussing how facing the Minotaur in a contest of violence made him feel alive. Hank's masculinity lies at the heart of season 4's greatest problems: the idea of heroism as a business, the transformation of the heroic institution into a police state, and the dehumanization of imprisoned persons. Hank's accrual of power allows his ideologies of punishment, of egoism, and of the virtue of unfettered capitalism to propagate throughout the Time Bureau, which serves as the driving force behind much of the first half of season 4. On the other hand, Nate is not interested in Hemingway's masculinity. Nate's masculinity is deeply in touch with feelings and empathy. Earlier in the season, Nate can tell that his best friend is having a bad day simply by how he returns a hug. Throughout the show, his character embraces what he likes without embarrassment and is generally what might be termed a nerd, who relies on force only as a final option. This has led to a rocky relationship with his father. Throughout the episode, Hank denigrates Nate's masculinity. Hank mocks him for being punched by a girl, for claiming that the library is his domain, and after an awkward run-in with the bisexual icon Constantine doing nude yoga in the library, Hank questions Nate's very identity as heterosexual. Finally, Nate is mocked for avoiding violence.
We gotta get this back to the ship, and I have to find a match to Dolly's drawing somewhere in the library.
We're supposed to protect history from the library, Nathaniel.
Okay, I see that you're really into drinking the Hemingway Kool-Aid, and by Kool-Aid I mean scotch. But we are here to catch a monster.
Of course. But I know we sure as hell aren't going to find out what it is by studying some finger paintings.
This conflict culminates when Nate comes up with a plan to play the lyre to lull the Minotaur to sleep, since the Minotaur used to be lulled to sleep as his mother played. Needless to say, Hank is not impressed.
Back on your feet already, Hank.
Yeah, your gal passed me up good. I'm just running through our strategy.
Oh, wait, you let him use our D&D miniatures?
No, I didn't let him touch Syndra, Lord of the Dark Elves.
You guys D&D without me too?
Son, why are you holding a tiny guitar, or do I even want to know?
Oh, this is a lute.
Someone say loot.
This is what we're gonna use to put the Minotaur to sleep.
I thought you said that was loot.
I don't understand.
Well, I suppose it is more of a liar. Everyone's a liar.
This is how we're gonna catch our creature, Dad.
That's your plan?
Yeah.
We're facing a literal monster. You think you can destroy it with a lute? You'll get out of my way.
I don't have to do what you say anymore, Hank.
Really? Because as your superior, I'm telling you to stand down.
You're going to the superior thing again. You know, you don't want to listen to me or understand me. You just want to be better than me.
Well, you want to talk about listening. You've ignored every lesson I've ever tried to teach you.
Because it's the same lesson over and over again. You want me to be more like you, Hank. But guess what? I'm not like you. I don't like televised golf or Tom Clancy books or 70s folk rock. I don't know if you happen to notice, but I'm a grown-ass superhero who's just trying to play the lute for a Minotaur.
Fine. don't listen to your old man, maybe you'll listen to your captain.
However, Hank is overruled when Sarah, the captain, backs Nate and declares that if they fail, Hank can fire them all. While Nate's plan initially lulls the Minotaur to sleep, Hemingway interrupts, attempting to shoot the sleeping Minotaur. Of course, this awakens the Minotaur, and the Minotaur proceeds to wreak havoc on Paris. Hank is sidelined and effectively powerless as the team and his son fight. His masculinity, which has been defined by violence, power, and autonomy, cannot accomplish anything. In order to solve this dilemma, he will need to adopt other people's plans and turn to a solution other than violence.
That's my boy! Over here! There is a young cowboy who lives on the range. His horse and his cattle are his only companion. He works in the saddle and he sleeps in the canyons, waiting for summer, his pastures to change.
What is happening?
James Taylor, and it's good.
And as the moon rises, he sits by his fire, thinking about women and glasses of beer, and closing his eyes as the dogies retire. He sings out a song which is soft, but it's clear, as if maybe someone could hear.
You got this, Dad.
Good night, you moonlight ladies. Rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams and rock-a-bye, sweet baby James.
What I find so interesting about this clip is the claim that Hank's masculinity does not need to be rejected wholesale in order to contribute to a productive solution. Hank doesn't magically change who he is or how he perceives the world. After having made fun of the lyre for being a quote-unquote mini guitar, he masculinely plays the guitar, singing a cowboy lullaby, the James Taylor song, Sweet Baby James. If we are to consider the song a self-lullaby, an interpretation James Taylor himself endorsed, this lullaby fits perfectly inside Hank's masculinity. It encourages autonomy and freedom. It is a lullaby that is sung to oneself. When Hank adopts Nate's plan with his own adaptations, he is not abandoning his masculinity. In Connell's theory, when hegemonic masculinity fails, that masculinity is immediately subordinated and replaced by a new conception of what is hegemonic. Yet here, when Hank's model of masculinity fails, he is not asked or forced to abandon his masculinity, and a new hegemonic masculinity is not established. Rather, Legends of Tomorrow attempts to pave a way for multiple masculinities to exist side by side, boldly making the claim that masculinities shouldn't need to be subordinated. Rather than denying Hank's masculinity a place in the solution, this episode deconstructs his masculinity in order to critique it, and then shows how it can be largely reconstructed with some small changes in order to be a part of the solution. Deconstruction as critique permits Hank and the audience to excise the portion of his masculinity that leads to toxic behavior, while the rest of Hank's masculinity is maintained and reconstructed into a masculinity that does not need to subordinate others. This is a pattern that is carried on throughout Season 4. Narratives are established, questioned, deconstructed, critiqued, and repurposed into something new. The season begins with the legends imprisoning magical creatures who roam through the timeline. For the first half of the season, these creatures are treated like inhuman monsters, much as the Minotaur is in this episode. However, as the legends continue to learn more about these monsters, their attitudes shift. Eventually, they free the monsters they have imprisoned and begin to deconstruct the very concept of monster itself. This narrative arc, a traditional ideology confronts a threat. The ideology fails to solve the problem, causing its deconstruction and critique, and as a consequence, a new ideology is constructed to solve the problem, fits into the larger aesthetic of metamodernism. To define it very briefly, at its most simple, metamodernism is a proposed model for defining what comes after postmodernism. It could be characterized as the recognition that all ideologies are subject to postmodern deconstruction, while simultaneously recognizing that we as human beings require ideological structures in order to exist in this world. This leads to a self-aware navigation from narrative to narrative, as we recognize narratives are flawed, but need to visit them nonetheless. I propose that metamodernism's willingness to deconstruct and reconstruct ideologies is the empowering force behind the utopian idealism of Legends of Tomorrow. It allows our heroes to make mistakes. It allows them to fail. It allows them to at times become monsters themselves. Here, to be a hero merely means putting in a concerted effort to keep growing and changing, moving between narratives. Conversely, the labels of villain and monster wear away under persistent attempts to understand the other as one of us. Rather, being monstrous becomes an inability to modify one's ideologies when reality itself begins to shift. This is why classics become such an effective foil. In popular conceptions, the classics represents something that doesn't change. It represents a body of stories, literature, and ideals that have been fossilized and cannot be malleable. This allows the Arrowverse to consistently use the classics as a tool to introduce narratives that are stale, outdated, and incapable of responding to the new challenges that the world is facing. The greatest virtue in Legends of Tomorrow is an ability to grow and to adapt to a changing world. A world where, according to these writers, the classics cannot provide productive answers. This then presents a challenge to us as classicists and educators. How do we respond to these claims? How do we better represent the vast range of texts, identities, and potential interpretations that exist within classical literature? We ought to view such popular readings of the classics as a call to action, an opportunity to demonstrate how our field can contribute to solving the problems of the 21st century. For the literature we study constantly strives to reconstruct and deconstruct conceptions of gender, ethnicity, class, and identity, the very issues that metamodernism continues to grapple with today. Thank you.